Well, we are not in the studio, and that's because so much is happening right now in the world, certainly in the Middle East, as Donald Trump and Iran have taken a step back from each other through looks like a brokered deal through Pakistan, which has put on hold the shock and awe that Donald Trump promised just this morning in some of the most incredibly non-diplomatic terms I think the world has seen ever. Joining me, Paul Micucci, Jim Lang, and Bradie Whetham as we unravel what's going on in the Middle East tonight.
Well, I got to tell you, I this is taco. I mean, we were joking about it earlier. Trump always chickens out. It's gone viral on social media. I mean, he had a deadline back on March 23rd. And after some of the most vitriolic, profane, most beyond the pale social media posts over the last few days, basically threatening to annihilate the entire Iranian people off the face of the earth, he all of a sudden out of nowhere drops this 2-week pause, and the price of oil is going down like $18 a barrel. How about that?
Yeah.
Hey guys, so it's interesting. I just pulled up Truth Social. So Trump gets on and he says the alleged statement put on by CNN and World News is a fraud. As CNN well knows, the false statement was linked to a fake news site from Nigeria and of course immediately picked up by CNN and blared out as a legitimate headline. The official statement by Iran was just released and posted on Truth Social below. Authorities are looking to determine whether or not the crime was committed on the issuance of a fake CNN World statement, or was it a sick rogue player? CNN is being ordered to immediately withdraw the statement with full apologies from their, as usual, terrible reporting. Results of the investigation will be announced in the near future. So, right away,
What?
CNN came out and said Iran claims victory, says it forced to accept 10-point plan. And then Trump is now saying, no, that's not the case.
Mm.
Yeah, interesting. Wow. So he's fighting, he's fighting at home, and he's been fighting all day, Jim and Mike and Bradie. Tucker Carlson, as we talked about a day ago, he's just been going bananas, and Trump and him have going back and forth. Trump went as far as in the New York Post to call Tucker a low IQ person who didn't know anything and was not in the know. Tucker coming out, going at him for his Easter Day post, his profanity. Even went as far to ask people around Trump to watch it. He didn't press the button, criticize him for not putting his hand on the Bible during inauguration. There's a bunch of stuff,
He accused him of war crimes, Paul.
He did. He accused him of war crimes, and he asked Christians to remove, which it's a comment I made a day before Tucker came out. I talked to Mike and you on the show, Jim, and I said, listen, you're looking at it from a Christian perspective. Trump's not. Tucker came out and said, there's no way he's a Christian. He's not acting like a Christian. Take your sport away if you're a Christian. Even went so far as to actually say that the school bombing might not have been by accident. Like really, really scathing stuff to be going back and forth between what is considered a true supporter of the Republican Party and a big supporter in the past, but it seems to have lost it. And the podcasting world just left him. Megyn Kelly, Joe Rogan, Tim Dillon, and even
Alex Jones.
Yeah, Candace
Theo
Owens, Nick
Vaughns.
Fuentes.
Yeah.
And then Alex
Smith.
Jones on Monday was asking for the 25th Amendment.
Yeah.
So to be exercised.
So this is, I think this is the big issue, Paul, is it's one thing for have Carney, Macron, Starmer, and all the world leaders say, like, I'm done with them. But he always thought, I think he had his core right-wing, alt-right podcasters who have a huge influence on America and the American public would always have his back. Now he's lost them. So what does he have?
Well,
he doesn't have much.
First thing, you don't have to agree with Tucker or agree with him to realize that the statement of saying that he's not intelligent is stupid. That's a very unintelligent. Tucker Carlson, whether you agree with him or not, is a highly intelligent human being, and that's why he's in the position that he's in. It's not just blind following. What Trump is doing and what anyone else that supports this is doing is very unchristian-like. Now, whether you believe in Christianity or you follow the morals of Christianity, that's on you to come up with your own assumptions and your own conclusions. But realistically, if we're using what Tucker is saying, that this isn't Christian, he is 100% right. And Trump claims that he's a Christian. He did this even on his campaign. One, I'm going to end wars and I'm not going to start wars. Two, I need to get into heaven.
I think that ship has sailed, Bradie. Ship has sailed.
Well, guys, it's really interesting because a couple of things have disturbed me to no end about this that maybe are bothering you as well. It's the economic end of it. I mean, today seeing people create human chains around, prominent and sensitive areas in Iran spoke volumes about what the humanity is in this. And we can talk about that for certain. But the one thing that I think keeps coming up is the impact that this has had on the global economy and, just the stability of certain nations alongside, the impact of the lies. It is really hard to get behind a guy who says this war ends when you open the Strait of Hormuz. It was open before you bombed the place. What the hell are you talking about? And the second thing that I will say is I read this about what happened in the 24 hours that Trump was swinging it around out there and saying some pretty wild things. I don't know if you guys saw this. I kind of mentioned it to you before the show, but I found it really disturbing how much had gone on in the last 24 hours. Apparently, since Trump made the announcement, 24 hours leading up to the deadline that Trump put in place, Iran hit major industrial cities in Saudi Arabia, the largest petrochemical complex on earth, the zone that produces 60 million tons of petrochemicals a year. 6 to 8% of everything the world manufactures was blown up. SABIC, the fourth largest petrochemical manufacturer on earth, is on fire right now. Dow Chemicals, Sadara Complex, 29 production units in total, already suspended production like weeks ago. And now Saudi Aramco paid $70 billion for their stake in SABIC, and that investment literally burning up right now. So the economy that got hit here and the refineries and the petrochemical areas that are the fallout of all of this have no real direct effect on America. But in certain states around them, major things happened in the last 24 hours as a result of this deadline.
Yeah.
So Iran hit harder than I think Trump wants to admit.
And consider this, gentlemen. So say this all goes away and everyone goes back to their respective corners. I see no appetite from the American people for any American military to go back there. They're like, let's just stay away from that place. Let's keep the Strait of Hormuz open. And because if they were going to do this to actually get proper regime change and boots on the ground, the amount of bloodshed and casualties, the American public have no stomach for that. And the American economy, I think that would cause massive damage. I think this is it. They thought they could get a quick victory in a few days. They blew it. They were wrong. They suffered big casualties, lost a lot of very, very expensive, sometimes irreplaceable equipment. And Trump is ending up with egg in his face. And the whole thing with Hexis and the generals will be talked about for years.
I'm going to be honest with you guys. I didn't expect the taco. I expected that we would start to see some pretty heavy bombing tonight because I don't think, in my mind, it didn't seem feasible that Trump wanted to lose face over this, even though so much of the world was leaning against him on it, denying him access in their airspace. I will say this, Mike, quickly. Someone must have got to him
because one of the flight trackers I monitor, the B-52s were over the Mediterranean and turned around and headed back to the base in England.
So the leader of Pakistan, he stepped in. He pleaded with Trump earlier this afternoon when we were all still in office, wrapping up at the studio. And by the time I had gotten back to my place a couple hours outside of the city, they had referenced that this was probably the leader of Pakistan. So give it up to Pakistan for, if that's the truth, for stopping this.
Well, because the B-52s, you could see them all, like a whole squadron of them turning around, heading back to England. Like, so something was going to happen.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. So yeah, if this all plays out that Pakistan played that role, good on them.
Good on them. Yeah. If that's true, good on them. Paul?
Well, it's interesting. And you're just talking about the impacts, the impacts that are happening now. And Mike was alluding to some of the things going on in the other Gulf states. But, this 10-point plan is really surrounding the discussion about it. A lot of it is about how to pay for the damage they did. I found it interesting that the key initiative in the 10-point plan is actually talking about a $2 million fee per ship. And that $2 million fee is going to go into a fund. Then that fund is going to be used for the reconstruction of all the things that were damaged, the infrastructure and the buildings and everything that went on. So, we just spent, all these days destroying all this infrastructure, buildings, all this stuff, people dying. And quite frankly, the thing they're negotiating now is how to put it back together, which I think, again, as the ships turn around and they go back to the U.S. and everyone goes back into their corners and everything sort of hopefully calms down, everyone lifts their sanctions and stops bombing each other and stops the strikes. The rebuilding and the actual impacts on the economies will still sustain. They'll still happen. And that's the challenge. The high-tech industry, which I know, it's kind of odd right now. You look at the markets, and Jim and I were talking, Bradie and I were talking before the show got on. The Dow leapt 900 points after the announcement. The NASDAQ, the S&P 500, all up to over 2% right away. And Jim was mentioning a barrel of oil went down 15%.
Like that.
Okay, so Paul, you see in Saudi alone, their investments over $100 billion went up in 24 hours. Meanwhile, we see Trump obviously playing the rise and fall of the stock market that he can control with a press release. It's a little frustrating. And to the point of $2 million per ship going through, an estimated $2 trillion damage has been done in the process, and losses in years to come on oil unable to be processed and shipped. That's 1 million ships through the Strait of Hormuz before they're back and even. I don't see how that's going to happen.
But you know what? It's interesting, Mike. And this was a Tucker Carlson comment earlier this week. And, his comment was, you're going to take a lot of money out of the economy that was coming from these states. So you're going to take it, and it's not going to go primarily into the high-tech industries that were going into America. So, this is where it's going to be, Americans think that, their gas prices are going to go down. We think that, everything's going to go back to normal. It's not going to go back to normal. This is going to have a shockwave through the economies that's yet to come. And I think whoever's just trying to game this, the markets right now, make a few bucks, is just doing that. They're gaming it. They're day trading it. And quite frankly, what we're going to see next is the real fallout of this. And that's unfortunate, because that's what's going to, cause us all to have to do and rethink what's happening in the Western Hemisphere. And, earlier on, we talked about it on our show. That's kind of the reality we're in right now. It's a better outcome, but it does have impacts. And quite frankly, who going forward is really going to take any more of these threats that seriously? Probably it's going to be hard to find anyone who's going to really. What's that?
But Paul, you raise a good point. Think about Mark Carney and all his trips looking for investors from the Middle East for these big infrastructure projects that he hopes will rebuild the Canadian economy. If Qatar And Dubai and Saudi Arabia have to rebuild their own infrastructure. They don't have money to invest into Canada, do they?
Well, they have all the money,
you know,
so there may be a bit to stretch out. But I think you're right, Jim. Like that runs out real quick after a war.
Well, and Bradie and Jim, you got to be thinking. They got to be at this point. They're going to be thinking of ways to insulate themselves from future conflicts. So if one thing all these conflicts teach us is that we do learn something. Unfortunately, and when it comes to Canada and what we've learned back in 1970 and before that, we don't seem to learn very quickly where our risks are. And they've just firsthand learned that they were vulnerable to all these things. So I assume not only are they going to rebuild, they're going to rebuild to insulate themselves from anything or any of these shockwaves going forward. This Strait issue that we look at, the picture you threw up on the screen, Bradie, it's absolutely bizarre, to tell you the truth, that anyone would think that was a sustainable model and that didn't have risks associated with it. I'm sure they're all saying we're never going to be in this spot again. So they're going to rebuild pipelines. They're going to rebuild infrastructure. I'm sure they're thinking that right now.
It's always been a dangerous spot, even before this war. They always had to worry about pirates and such, right? In these waters.
Yeah.
Like it's always been, it's as small as it looks. And even on the screen, it is small in terms of bodies of water. It's always been a problem. But like Mike said at the beginning of the show, it wasn't the problem they have now. So I've heard 4 reasons why this war is going on. 1, regime change. 2, evil terrorists and nuclear missiles. I guess that's 2 and 3. And then 4, now that they got to open up this strait. So what is the actual reason why this war started?
That is still to be worked out. And real quick, I will say this. Every naval expert in the world would be prepared to tell Donald Trump that you can't win a war with Iran unless you have the means to protect ships going in and out of the Strait of Hormuz. That's the key. Yeah. That's like trying to win back France in World War II without going to Normandy. You have to do it.
If you look at the land masses around where you need to pass, it's dangerous territory. I mean, if you look at it from a good old Western plot, that's like walking into
the ambush.
Being surrounded in an ambush. It's so easy to see that on a map. One of the things, and Paul, I wanted to ask you because I know that you'll watch the markets and you'll see what's going on here. The fact that you think that there's going to be reverberations on this, on the economy, what do you think the next move is for Carney on this topic? Yeah,
good question.
I think, honestly, you have to get your resource base in play. It's almost a nationalistic play. You have to take a look at the resources you have to be an independent nation, and you have to start to figure out how to utilize them, because you're not definitely going to get funding, like we talked about, from those states that are trying to rebuild. Europe is in no better shape than we are right now as far as economies. They're carrying higher deficits, higher debt loads than we are right now. So you really have to take a look at your resource base, try to figure out a way to optimize it. And that has to where you have to regroup from a Canadian perspective. And, you almost have to, I know we've deferred our budget now to the fall, which in hindsight is a really good idea, because we're going to have to go back and figure out where the allocation of funds to optimize the capital spend for projects that are resource driven. And we've talked about it on previous shows, but it sure as heck has come full circle to the point where, that discussion on pipelines, that discussion on LNG, that discussion on mining, you were looking at it now. We're doing a show tomorrow, which is interesting. And I was just getting ready for it before we jumped on this call. Lithium, we only produce 2.6% of the amount of lithium in the world. So, and that lithium is coming from China, it's coming from Australia, it's coming from Chile. With these trade routes and everything going on in the world now, we're at risk in our, I know we wanted to be all battery operated. I thought, quite frankly, when I got into the show, we produced a lot more lithium. So
I did too. That's shocking to me. I really thought that was a boon for us that we might be able to take advantage of. But, Paul, you raise a good point. And sorry, Jim.
No, please, Mike.
I think that if you take a look at it from a nationalistic effort, that's an opportunity for Carney at the moment. It gives him the opportunity to say, okay, we have to make some changes to how we handle resources, to how quickly we push together all of the appropriate passing of bills, that, all of the process and protocols to get businesses going in certain industries and certain resources are quickly put into place, because we are trying to rebuild and get back to an affordable place on earth. And that might be the opportunity he has to say, okay, I got to put net zero aside. Okay, we have to move closer to getting industry moving. I wonder if you think that'll happen.
Well, and this goes back to there was the announcement that they want to build a high-speed rail at $90 billion. And even Andrew Coyne from the Globe and Mail saying, wait a second, and Pierre Poilievre has a point. We don't have the money for that right now. We need to spend that money on pipelines to BC and natural gas pipelines to Churchill and other things. And with the economy in the world right now, we don't have the luxury of spending $90 billion on a high-speed rail that only goes 500 kilometers.
Well, I think that plan was put in place before the world was doing exactly what it's doing now. So hopefully that gets thrown out and pipelines start to get built.
Well, I don't think they have a choice, right, Paul?
No, they don't have a choice. I think that's the discussion this week that I think is going to have to take place in Montreal. Is they're going to have to come to grips with what they have to do it. The other one that comes is the full defense. You look at this.
Yeah.
Just look at this from face value of what went down in the last 2 months. We've got to kind of recalibrate and say, okay, what are we doing? Are we a standalone country? Do we want to have our own defense? That this has brought a lot of things to light with our neighbor, and quite frankly, there's always a discussion about whether we commingle defense and all that good stuff. We might want to be on our own right now and have our own defenses in play. And that's a discussion that we have to have. Like, we have to start, and that's where I think the US is correct. And I think the conversation is about us either ponying up or actually putting enough money in it to sustain ourselves is a good conversation that, as a mature country, we need to sit down and really look at ourselves and say, okay, we need tomorrow 300,000 men and women to be in the Canadian Armed Forces. We need to man up or woman up or person up to that conversation and say to the Canadians, there's got to be 300,000 of you step up right now and volunteer to do this. Because that's what at the minimum, that's what an armed force has to look like to be at what the world needs. And quite frankly, I know that's a tough conversation, but that's where we're at right now.
Well, and Paul, I couldn't agree more, but this is the challenge for Minister McGuinty and Mark Carney, is just having the infrastructure to process that many new people to the military and equip them. I mean, that's where all this new defense money, a lot of that's just going to have to be basic training, giving them the trade in their specialty and the equipment they need to do that for that many new people.
Well, this is a post-war effort, right? At this point, sorry, Bradie. This is a post-war effort at this point. Accommodations are going to have to be made. Budgetarily, yes, we can't spend $90 billion here. We need to spend $90 billion making a career in the military seem like a good option, that you're going to have a pension and a good pay, and that you're going to be posted in places around the world where you're going to make a difference. You're fully trained. I do think that's necessary. Guys, a quick question. Bradie, you go first, but I do want to ask a question after that about all the rumblings about Canada joining the European Union.
No.
Well, yeah. Well, don't get me started on that one. Okay, I'll get this thought out quick, and we'll go into that direction. Well, we got to look at it this way. If we need those 300,000 soldiers and we need to pull resources and keep this all in house, we need to get those soldiers now, because this takes years. Jim would probably know better than I. How long would it take to put 300,000 soldiers in position to be actually ready to defend this country?
I mean, in a crisis situation, if all things were like 10 months, a year,
okay, so
best case scenario,
1 year. That means we're 2 years away from getting resources or getting oil out of the ground and a refinery built and getting that done. So we need them having 1 year in of experience to know what to do when we start stockpiling our resources and we ended up getting ahead. Because if Canada gets ahead, Paul's right. We need defense. big time.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's an allocation of resources also from, we got to give up this affordable housing plight, and we got to move on to do housing for military, housing for essential services. We're going in the wrong direction there. We've said that on the show for a while. We're going totally, I know we want to appease a bunch of people that feel that they, want a cheaper, affordable housing. I understand that. But right now, with what's going on in Canada, that shouldn't be a priority. We're focused on given our real estate woes in central Canada and our real estate woes in other places on the West Coast. So I think that has to be relooked at. But the EU, that's another one. Mike, I'm gonna let you kind of jump in on that one for a minute with Jim, but and then I'll jump in on that one.
I don't want any.
So I've traveled to Europe on, and experienced the EU, where you drive from France to Germany, to Spain to Italy. You don't have to show a passport. It's great. You just use the euro everywhere. That's great. I can't help but think that this sort of poll that came out of nowhere was floated by some people in the Mark Carney office and the Liberal office to gauge public sentiment. Yeah. It's almost like a trial balloon, because I'm trying to think, what would the benefit be to Canada, and does that mean we lose the Canadian dollar and we're part of the euro? Isn't that what happens to all the countries in the European Union?
I just don't know how much baked beans I can eat. Would we have to do that? Even England didn't want to be part of the EU. So
But I like schnitzel, and Germany's in the EU, so I'll do it for the schnitzel.
Oh, you know what, Jim? I've rethought the whole thing on schnitzel too.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't want to be part of the EU, guys.
No. I think it was. I think it was an air burger that was floated by the Liberal Party just to see where people stand. But it came at a time where the rest of the world was denying Donald Trump any sort of attention or any positivity toward his actions in Iran. And so I think that it got a little bit more volume because of that. I don't think there's any sensibility to it at all.
It had about as much weight as the 51st state comment.
Mm.
Yeah. Oh, what do we think about that? Now, it sounds to me like Trump backstepped, or I don't know, somebody caught a moment with him.
Tacos are going to taco.
Okay. You know what? It's almost the end of Taco Tuesday. Do we have any final thoughts on what's going on, and where do we think this actually ends up? Does this go the full 2 weeks? Do they negotiate? Do we have a 10-point system? Like, where are we at here, guys? Jim?
I'm going to say it goes at least 10 days. Trump has got to rebuild a lot of support within his own country and his own government before he even thinks about breaking this plan. They have got to find a way around this. And both Mike and Paul have mentioned it. Even if this does come to some sort of end, fertilizer, microprocessors, petroleum, there's so many things that will take weeks, months, maybe even longer to get back to full speed. And we'll be feeling the effects of this around the world for months to come. So I think this is, and with nothing to show for it. As an American, you're like, what did we actually do? What did we win?
At one of the most difficult times in my life, economically and sociologically, wow, this then hit. We needed this post-pandemic like a hole in the head, and it seems to be to no good end. Paul?
No.
Yeah, I'm thinking 3 days right now.
So really?
I'm thinking 3 days. I really kind of with Bradie on this one.
I'll take that bet.
Yeah, I really think that they haven't been able to keep any peace plans in play. Since this year, probably the last 2 years.
2 years. So, Russia and Ukraine had ceasefires every other couple days, and they kept.
So I think that, and we don't talk about it, but you have Israel sitting there right now. They're kind of the wild horse. You notice tonight that they're very quiet. You haven't seen much, statements. You haven't seen much coming out from them. There was a lot of scuttlebutt. There's a lot of kind of fake news during the day of bridges and everything going on from Israel. So there's a lot of stuff flying around. So I think you still have to wait and see what the reaction is from them. I think you got some other things to look at. So I think definitely you got some challenges that are up right now that you got to really pay attention to. Yeah, I did just think it's going to be hard, and I hope not, but it does. I'm still thinking that.
Look, I hope this ceasefire lasts forever. Like, I hope this is it. Like, this is done. And I know that we all agree on that. There's no good outcome of a war going on. We're not stock traders, right? Otherwise, I couldn't see there being a reason why you're going to benefit from something like this. So I hope this is it. I hope the ceasefire is forever. But realistically, I think we hear something probably by the end of tomorrow, if not 3 days.
I'm in the 3-day window as well, I have to admit, guys.
Yeah, it's not good.
And I do know this: the long-term image of Donald Trump has been shattered, and I don't know if you can ever fix it.
It's done. And I behave on this network. I don't really say anything negative about him. I let Jim does enough for all of us, right? But this is it. You're not getting into heaven, buddy. Just call it in.
Yeah. Well, I think the tough part. I think that the tough part, and we've talked about it before, but I think the tough part is, even with the peace plan getting done and even having to head back home, the questions that are going to come, and he's facing primaries and all the things coming on. So I think he's got so many questions heading back home, questions why we started, why they started, that becomes paramount for his, future. And unfortunately, when they see the side effects of this, when it hits the economy back home and here, I think the next set of questions come. So that's the challenge, right? It's just, we just before this, we hit the tariff bump, and then we had all the tariffs, the Supreme Court decision, and all that going on. And then we decide to do this. And, it just seemed like it's a cascade of things that are sort of going sideways now. His media support, his podcasting team that support him seems to be, starting to give up and move sideways. So there just seems to be so many things going on that it's going to be hard to face up to. And then, quite frankly, what happens next? Because if the country gets deadlocked, you have a few more years left where, quite frankly, you're just going to see gridlock and nothing's going to pass, nothing's going to go forward. There's going to be legal challenges. That doesn't help growth and productivity in the country either. So there, that's the challenge, right? He, whether you liked him or didn't like him, he did have a plan. He did have a vision. He did want to go in a direction. Whether it was going to work or not, I have no idea. There were days I thought it did have some glimpse of hope, and other days I thought it was crazy. But does he even get close to enacting it now? Even this happened, and probably not.
I think you're right. I think the next unfortunate thing for the U.S. is stagnation as they sit in gridlock, and their situation. Stagnation is the word that I think I come up with, because I don't see how they advance themselves. I don't see how their immigration plan executes anymore without, frankly, civil war. I think that the polarity of the nation is definitely going to intensify, and it's going to leave Americans in a worse position.
Yep, here.
Yeah. No, and now the interesting thing is, I guess, if you look at the international global perspective of this, this ends, and maybe after 3 days, and it ends. He goes, they float their boats home. They get back home. What happens around the world? What happens in China? What happens in India? What happens in Russia? Those are all the things that I think you got to look at. And I think those are the things that are going to be our next set of shows, because if there's no pure global order, then quite frankly, the other countries just increase their footprint in the world. And that's the outcome of this crazy, conflict or war that we really didn't see an end to.
Yeah.
That's a perspective tough to look at, but seems entirely logical. Well, it remains to be seen over the next couple of days what happens. I know this: if we're getting together in our jammies after work like this, guys, we'll probably keep some good coverage while we're in the studio. So I'll recommend people stay with us through this process. We're watching it from all kinds of angles, and certainly with a Canadian perspective on it and a Canadian eye on things. Bradie, thank you for coordinating all this tonight. Paul and Jim, thanks for being here. And thank you for being with us. I hope that you'll recommend us to a friend, subscribe, and don't hesitate to support the network. Keep the wheels on the cart. We'll see you next time.
See you, boys.